Hey, it's Carl with a K. Let's talk about Hollywood. Hi there, this is Carl Gibson, your host of Let's Talk About Hollywood. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here. I want to thank the listeners in the top 10 countries where I've had downloads, the most downloads in the last week. So I want to thank listeners and downloads because I know that they're separate. I know I don't necessarily download every podcast that I listen to, so I don't want to leave listeners out. So I want to thank everyone in the United States, China, Spain, France, the United Kingdom, Finland, Germany, and Italy. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And this episode goes back to the journals. If you've been following this podcast, then you know this is a niche memoir, audio memoir about my career in Hollywood starting in 2001. We're in season 2 of the show, which tackles 2002. So every season covers a year. And so we're in 2002. It's summer. And this episode, I want to tell you just in advance, there is a trigger warning for drug use and self-harm. And in what I'm about to tell you, I'm absolutely not going to exploit it. I'm going to just tell you the way that I experienced the situations that I'm about to describe. So before I get into the episode, I want to tell you, if you've been following this podcast, then you know that prior to my career officially starting in Hollywood proper with The Hollywood Reporter, I was an actor for years, a professional actor starting at the age of 15. I wasn't a child star. I wasn't a teen star. I was a professional actor, really. I was in Washington, D.C. I was in Maryland. I got my first professional job when I was 15 with a Pulitzer-winning playwright who quit the show the second day and walked off with my paycheck in his pocket, which I ended up getting. But you can imagine my father had passed away, so my mom, of course, is my everything, my hero, my only living parent. And she was like, oh no, what kind of business is this where someone just walks off with your paycheck? So she wouldn't sign releases for me to do films. She was like, if you want to work in theater, then you can do that. But even when I did get a theater job, you see what happened. Like, this guy had creative differences and just literally walked off with my paycheck. He had our paychecks in his pocket for the first week, and I never saw him again. I got reassigned to The Wiz and got fired the first day at 15. So anyway, I became a professional actor at 15, and I acted pretty much up until I was about 29, 30 years old, and then segued into The Hollywood Reporter at around 31 years old. Like I said, I started as an editorial assistant, and editorial assistants aren't usually 31, but I knew what I was doing. I looked younger. I went from the mailroom to the newsroom in the space of a day. Now, prior to all of this, just for background, before this had happened, I was acting. This was around 1997. I auditioned for this role, and I went into the casting office on Sunset Blvd, and my scene partner basically was there to make sure that I had a vibe, right? That's why he was there. And his name was Luciano, and he was Mexican and Spanish. He was, I didn't really get a read on him. He seemed somewhat friendly, but he ended up giving me, good feedback when I did my audition. The audition took about 15 minutes. I got cast, and he ended up being one of my main scene partners in a very successful project. Okay, so it's not on IMDb. This is like 1997. It was made a lot of money, and he was great. And I had other co-stars, but he was my favorite. His name was Luciano. And he was really a character. One, he was just incredibly funny. He was so funny, and he was very emo, and he was very passionate. He was very fiery. Whereas I tend to be, save it for the set. I never really maintained any kind of high maintenance or fraught emotions off set, because why? Like, you're not getting paid that much. And even if you were, it's just not, it just wasn't my thing to walk around in a state of whatever. Well, he and I became really good friends, me and Luciano. He had a boyfriend named Gordon, and they argued all the time. And the more successful that our show became, the more I started hanging out with Luciano off the set. So I helped him move into his apartment. It was off of Burton Way, overlooked the 101. Remember, but it had a great rooftop. It was a beautiful apartment. Just classic off Hollywood Boulevard realness. Yeah, it was a great place, and him and Gordon had it. Luciano did, and like I said, it overlooked the 101 freeway. So it wasn't very glamorous, but it was great for our age, to be in your 30s. Well, he was a little older than me, so to be in your early 30s and, be nesting with your boyfriend, it was kind of cool. I was happy for them, but they weren't a very happy couple. And Luciano had some things that he had been dealing with in the past. He'd had a lover who had committed suicide. He came home and his lover had hung himself in the kitchen from the ceiling fan. So Luciano had some really deep trauma around that. And I thought, he was doing well with Gordon, but like I said, they argued a lot. But in the meantime, we would hang out together. So we were friends off the set, is the point. And Gordon had given me his phone number once when they were arguing, which I told Luciano about. And Luciano started crying, which, instantly, like I'd slapped him. Like, oh no. And I just said, hey, look, it's not like I'm going to call your boyfriend. I'm just telling you, you guys are arguing all the time. Like, maybe this isn't the way, But at the same time, staying friends with them, we used to go to the movies together. We saw Titanic together. The very first showing of the Titanic, the James Cameron movie. Look, the Titanic. The very first showing of Titanic. And it was like at 8 a.m. at Mann's Chinese Theater on Hollywood Boulevard. The James Cameron crew, they had jackets that said, I survived. And they'd crossed out Titanic and it said, I survived James Cameron. And it was all in good fun the way that they meant it, because of course that film, the making of that film is legendary. So we always hung out together, doing those kind of things back in the day, because we were actors together, and we pretty much worked together from 1997 to 1998. And so in 1998, I was up for another show that I could do simultaneously, and I was waiting to see if I'd gotten a call back. So I remember Luciano saying, oh, come over to my apartment and you can wait there. And I did, and I got cast, and I found out there. So it was great. Like we had like a drink at noon, to celebrate. It was awesome. And at some point, Gordon, his boyfriend, Luciano's boyfriend, came out to say hi. And I was sitting on the couch, and Gordon came out in these boxers with no underwear on under the boxers, of course. So you could see, we're all adults here, you could see a massive dick print in his shorts. And Gordon, he knew what he was doing. He was just like, so Carl, and Luciano was like, put on some clothes, Gordon. God. Yeah, so they're arguing again. And I'm just kind of like, oh, man, like, I don't care. I honestly, like, that kind of thing, I was just like, I just ended up, taking a bathroom break. I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go, wash my hands. And that's a great segue. If you ever need to just, make a quick exit, just, can I wash my hands? That's what I did. So I went to their bathroom, and the medicine cabinet was open. And I saw a light bulb, a pipe cutter. There had been like a hole filed out in the top of the light bulb, and then the filament at the bottom, the metal portion had been removed, and there was all this residue, and there were spent matchsticks all around, or matches. And I was like, it looks like a bong, but like, what kind of fucking bong is that? But I mean, of course, I didn't need to be a rocket scientist. I'm like, that's like, it must be meth, because at the time in Hollywood, especially in the late 90s, meth was still a thing, and it was an epidemic. So there were billboards about it. That was back when they used to call meth Tina, tweakers, the whole thing, so not so much the way that you hear about it today. I mean, I think now meth is much more talked about in the insidious way that it should be, just because it's a ferociously terrible drug. And I don't know it from experience, but I do know it from being affected by other people who have been struggling with it or who have used it. And this was a lot in the entertainment industry at the time. The set that Luciano and I were working on, one of our other co-stars got fired one night. He was on meth. And when I say on meth, this back then, and again, this isn't the 1800s, but I would say the way that I experienced it on the set, meaning with other actors, would be, they saw themselves as weekend warriors. I'm a weekend warrior. It's just on the weekend. It's nothing, during the week. It doesn't affect my work. And this one particular actor that Luciano and I worked with, he was high as a kite. He was grinding his teeth. And the director noticed. And he said, Mark, I need you to do it again. Do it again. Get it together. Pull your shit together. And Mark said, fuck you, to the director. The director said, excuse me? He said, I said, fuck you. Fuck your black ass. Well, that's what the director happened to be black. He said, fuck your black ass. Well, he got fired on the spot, like escorted out by security. So that's one co-star down. And now I'm at Luciano's house, and I'm seeing like his paraphernalia, and I'm like, oh man. But I what could I really say? I wasn't digging through his medicine cabinet, and I just left. Just said, okay, Luciano, Gordon, bye, and I went home. Well, I'd say Luciano and Gordon started having problems, and then Luciano started getting into some really dangerous situations where he was getting hurt. And one, he had been assaulted, and I would see him on the set. I'd see like these, like one day I saw, it looked like grass stains on his thighs. And I knew he played in a gay football league. And so I said, what is that, from the field? But it wasn't grass. It was literally his veins from where he had this assault, and him and this guy got into it, and he got assaulted in San Francisco. And so Luciano stopped being as reliable. There were many times that he didn't show up on set. I would have to, go live with other people or different scene partners, and sometimes just have to work by myself. And that was really hard because, number one, you've already rehearsed, you already know what you're going to do. And so it was constant chaos, and it started to get really bad. And so I don't, he started calling in, and his excuse was, I took Tylenol PM, I overslept. Well, in Hollywood, where time is money and you're wasting everyone's time when you're doing that kind of shit, you can imagine the executives, the showrunners are like, we don't like this. You need to get it together. He's not telling me what's going on. He's just telling me, he'll call me every now and then and say, just tell him I'm going to be late and I overslept. And of course I would. And then he wouldn't show up. So he was already on thin ice. And so finally one night, it's like 2 a.m. It's late. He's not there. He shows up. I'm doing a scene. He comes in and gets fired at the door. Like, he goes to check the call sheet. He's gone. They're like, you're done. He's like, I called Carl. I called you guys. I said that I overslept. I took a Tylenol PM. And I can hear him while I'm doing my scene thinking, no one's falling for this shit. Like, this is crazy. Like, what are you doing? And he gets fired. He's extremely upset. He walks right over to me while I'm doing my scene and goes, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Some friend you are. Hope you're happy. And like storms out. And I am totally taken off guard. So again, this is 1998 that this happens. So this is pre-Hollywood Reporter. The crew understood what was going on. I left the fucking scene and he was barreling down the fire escape steps. Like, he couldn't even wait on the elevator. He just wants to get out because it's everybody's fault. He's all pissed. I chased him down the fire escape. It's not funny, but I caught up with him and I slammed him up against the wall in the stairwell. And God only knows what the security guard thought, because I know it was all on camera. And, I slammed him up against the wall and I lifted up his shirt, Luciano's shirt, and I bit him right on the chest. Now, not blood or a wound, but just like to wake him up. That's all I could think. Just lifted up his shirt, bit him on the chest. He goes, damn it. And he slaps me. I don't care. I hold him pinned up against the wall and I go, what are you doing? What are you doing? And why are you blaming me? Thanks a lot. Like, have you lost your fucking mind? This is your career. What are you doing? He storms out. We end up on Sunset Boulevard, and it's like 2 a.m. He's furious at me. I'm furious at him, just because I'm hurt. I'm like, whatever you're going through, I'm like, there's ways to keep there were ways to keep your job. Like, no one's stupid. You can't just keep, you're unreliable, and you know what you're doing, and you're affecting me, and you're affecting yourself. And so I'm really basically pleading with him and for our friendship. And he just said, good luck. Good luck to you. And he walked off, and I never saw him again. And I remember not going back onto the set. Like, I just took like 15 minutes just trying to process, like, what the fuck just happened here? And this is my very good friend. We've been friends for almost 2 years. So he's fired. There's no telling what's going to happen. And like I said, I never saw Luciano again. And he'll come up again in this episode, though, that I'm about to share with you. We're back to the journals. I just wanted to give you that story on background about Luciano and his boyfriend, Gordon. And they were, just drugs had become a real problem in their lives. And this episode is called Chaos and Confrontation on the Sunset Strip. Wednesday, July 17th, 2002. I got off work at the Hollywood Reporter and decided to take the bus home. I was on the bus, and it was a bus ride like any other. There were 2 girls on the bus. The taller of the 2, before I even sat down, said, "Ooh, "Can I play in your hair? It is so pretty." I looked at her nicely, but with a look that couldn't believe she was serious. Her girlfriend was giggling, and the taller girl said, "Really? I do hair. I braid hair. Can I play in your hair?" Her girlfriend laughed and said, "Girl, leave that boy alone. He don't want you playing in his head." The tall girl looked at me and said, "His hair is so pretty. Make me feel like shit." She pouted, smoothing back a bone-straight ponytail. "That's not true. Your hair is nice," I said, and that was the end of that exchange. They got off on Santa Monica and La Brea, and I waved goodbye. They were teenagers. I don't know what stop it was, but these two guys got on the bus. One was Latino, lean, and he had a boating hat on and jeans, the kind of relaxing at a gay barbecue look. He sat down in his own seat and instantly started shooting me these looks like he was checking me out. I kept a poker face, no harm done, plus I had on shades so I could keep an eye on him in case he tried to get upset with me. A tall, chunky, brown-skinned guy sat across from the Latin guy. They were together and said, "My leg's too long to fit under this seat." And he put his legs across the other empty seat next to him. The voice was unmistakably accented and had a slight lisp from his overbite. His hair was short and gelled into curls, and a receding hairline gave way to the tiniest, thin widow's peak of hair. I had heard that voice so many times before, but this man was almost unrecognizable, so I just looked at him through my shades to try to see if I could detect any familiar facial planes. He got up and went back to the bus driver, and his track pants were sliding down, and the band of his black underwear was showing. The man came back and sat down and pulled out his wallet, and I saw his ID, an old one, where he had a bald head, and I knew right then it was Gordon, Luciano's ex-lover. I took off my glasses so as not to seem pretentious, and I said, "Gordon?" He looked at me and said, "Yes?" I said, "It's me, Carl." His face lit up and he said, "Hey, I didn't even recognize you. You look good, boy. How are you doing?" I said, "Fine," and smiled innocuously at his boyfriend, who smiled and waved back. I had to ask, without pushing the knife in, "How's Luciano?" Gordon looked at me for a second and said, "Luciano is dead." My entire face froze in sheer shock. Thank God we were in the back of the bus and only one other person was there reading his newspaper. I said, "What?" He said, "Luciano has been dead for 3 years." I said, "I'm so sorry. How?" Gordon said, "Throat cancer. It took him quick, too." I asked Gordon if Luciano had suffered. Gordon said, "He didn't suffer long, but he suffered hard. They had to go through his throat and resection his stomach. You wouldn't have even recognized him. His sister came to take him to San Bernardino to be with his parents, and then he died weeks later. And he died mean, too, because he was in so much pain. Before he left town, all of the clothes of mine that I was supposed to pick up, he sold them in a garage sale." Gordon's stop came, and he and his boyfriend got off the bus. "Good to see you, Carl. Take care," Gordon said, and I sat there in a stunned state. All I could think was that Luciano never saw the 21st century, and that he died before he was even 40. Such a vibrant and sweet person. I thought of how I've been assuming that one of these days I'd run into him and he'd give me a big hug and a kiss on the cheek. Luciano, he wouldn't have shied away from that display. I thought of that apartment I helped him move onto next to the Hollywood freeway and how I'll never see him again. I kept it together long enough to get my connecting bus and, thanks to dark glasses, cried all the way home. I cried for the next 2 hours. I had to get it together and called a couple of people from our old job who knew him as well, and they all were shocked. I called my friends everywhere and told them. One of our co-stars, an actress, she hollered and screamed, "What?" It was terrible. I finally got into my apartment crying, and I felt bad for the timing because Stone has a job, He's got a permanent job, and he's got to be so happy, and he's so relieved about the job. But he seemed to understand. By the time I had made my 45 minutes worth of calls telling my former coworkers about Luciano, Stone, who had been celebrating his new job, was drunk on the balcony, something that truly upset me. I was done with my tears by now, and Stone was lucid enough to tell me, quote, "You can't be responsible for everybody. You are a powerful person, and you want everyone to be happy and safe, but people do what they want to do in this life. You can't take it all on yourself." I agreed with Stone, and I was standing there on the balcony and thinking about how many people have just lost their minds in LA, people I loved and who were such great personalities. As we were talking, I just knew I had to grip the balcony rail. I kept my back turned, and it was all I could do to stand there. And that is where I will end that journal entry. There is a recap, which is going to happen now. There was more that's in that journal entry that I'm not going to include here. I'll tell you about it. It's not that it is terrible. It just kind of is. It goes into different topics, and this episode is more about losing my friendship with Luciano and not knowing that he had passed away. And what ended up happening was, Stone had gotten a new job. He was very happy about it. I was really upset. He, of course, was sympathetic to that. But he had been celebrating getting this new job. And so because I had been making all these phone calls and because I had, the night was getting late, kind of celebrated without me. And then that turned into him saying, hey, there's things that are affecting our relationship, which is, there were three things. One was that I just do too much homework when I get home, too much news, too much paperwork. And secondly, we didn't go out to clubs or dance enough together, which had been a complaint, that he had, that was going back some time, which I've mentioned in the other journals. And then the third one was, you're not into kids. And I was like, what? Because as you know, I knew that Stone wanted kids. And at the same time, I just didn't even see how that was possible for me. And I'd always been very honest with him that if he wanted to have kids, I understood if he needed to break up with me and be with someone else who could make that dream a reality, because that's important to a person. And I didn't want to be selfish and say, I don't want to have kids and that's it. So you're stuck with me, if that's not enough. And so, it was just in hindsight, it was just a really rough night. I was exhausted. And in reading the journal entry and in doing this episode, it really comes down to, in this particular instance, just being so very sad. When a friendship breaks up, a good friendship, you always kind of have that hope that you'll run into each other again, or that, all it'll take is just, a couple sentences and you'll both just be like, oh, that was nuts, and you'll move past it. And that didn't happen here. And it doesn't happen a lot, unfortunately. And it certainly doesn't happen when there are drugs in the mix. And Luciano never did meth in front of me. I never saw it, but I did see the evidence of it. He told me of instances that were happening that were causing his life and his relationship to unravel. And I guess this was the first time for me on that level to lose a friendship to drugs. And I'd lost a relationship to it before in my 20s. I knew that you couldn't, there's not enough love in the world from one person to mitigate an addiction like that. Because if it was, then that's all it would take, right? Like it's a much more individual process. It's for those in recovery, I'm sure, I don't want to overspeak or oversimplify it. Like I said, I'm not exploiting this topic. I can just tell you, again, the epidemic, the growing epidemic of meth at the time in the late 90s, which is when my friendship with Luciano was strong and we were acting together for 2 years. The meth then was, there were not as many overdoses because it wasn't laced with fentanyl as it is now. And actually in the last 2 years, overdoses in Los Angeles County have gone down. But at the time, it was just becoming more readily available. And it was becoming a real problem in Los Angeles to where it was articles and different ways that it was affecting other people and reaching into different sectors with teenagers and white collar workers. And anyway, I just, for this episode, I think it's just me kind of coming to terms with this is really, really serious. And while he died, Luciano died of something completely unrelated. I just knew that our friendship had ended over it, and it made me sad. And it wouldn't be the first time. And back then and again, this wasn't like I said, it wasn't the 1800s, but one thing you could tell, and maybe, I wasn't in Hollywood for that wave of cocaine in the 70s and 80s. But I could just say in the 90s, the way that you would see meth manifest itself with actors, which was the world that I was in, more like one, weight loss, which in Hollywood, who isn't trying to lose weight, right? And so someone who secretly is on meth at that time, all of a sudden they're dyeing their hair, a different color. But I'm saying where it's like they look great, they've lost weight, and you're just like, wow, it's just kind of like this makeover at the time that you don't know where it's coming from, but you're like, wow, these are some bold choices. And they've got energy and they're doing this and they're doing that. And then it's just, they hit a wall and all of that starts to deteriorate. And then the paranoia and then the confrontations. And so this was kind of the first time, not in a romantic aspect, but in a friendship aspect, where I was like, this drug is so powerful, it's negated everything. In Luciano's case, like, he doesn't believe I'm his friend. He doesn't remember any of the things we've shared. He doesn't know that I've tried to cover for him because he said he's got this under control, because who am I? I can't tell him what to do. And just, I was powerless. And so to this day, I have a folder of letters that he used to write me on the set. We used to write each other because, there'd be a lot of downtime, and say we weren't in the same scene or we weren't working together that day. And the letters, some of them are really friendly, like, hey, da 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 da. And then some are pissy, where he's telling me, you seem to have an attitude today. Or, it's really hard to work, with someone who's not telling you what's going on. Because, I tended back then to be, if I was moody, I just kind of would shut down. And also I'd be like, if it's not about the work, then what do you care? That I'm keeping to myself. But he didn't like that. He was a very emotional person. And he was just great. He was, like I said, he was funny. And when you're working together, especially in a creative aspect, and you're sharing all these different things, and you kind of know the backstories of what's informing all of this great acting or these great choices, to have drugs just come into the middle of it. And, maybe it was too much. I'll never know. I will never know. But I do know that when I look at him in a movie that he was in, or I see him dancing on film, I always get happy. Oh, it always makes me happy to see him. And so that's my friend Luciano. And all I can say is, I want to honor him. And he was a great friend, and I miss him. Besos, Papa. That's my message to him. And I'm sure he's in heaven, and he's incredible. And I love him. I hope he knows that. So that's going to do it for this episode today. Thank you for listening. Again, I know it's a heavy topic, but as you know, with these recaps, I try to put things into perspective, and once again, not exploiting the topic, just that this is what would happen sometimes when it came to drugs in Hollywood and with peers. And I'd certainly have, years later, a much more intense experience with someone who was in the throes of that addiction with meth, and to pretty devastating consequences. So that's what the episode was about. Thanks for trusting me and knowing that I, could share this with you and not just dump it there. I think it's something that a lot of us can relate to, and in trying to navigate and make sense of the insense of what just makes no sense. I can't even say it's nonsensical, just making sense of what you can't even comprehend because it is so individual. But I know for people who have struggled with it, I've seen it. They have healed and they've gotten better. And I know people who have been completely just taken down to absolute rock bottom, who are married now, who are working, who have restored their friendships. And so it's not all gloom and doom. It's just very individual. And so that's the episode. And I appreciate you being here as always. There will be another episode soon. We'll be, this was the journals, and we'll be back to the journals. And if there's anything that you'd like to share with me or any questions that you have for me, we could do an AKA, right? Ask Carl anything. Within reason. Not about things that this algorithm doesn't feed, like politics and such like that. Only just because I know that there's a whole nother podcast ecosystem that's out there for that. But you could ask me anything, or you could share whatever you like. And you can reach me at Studio Exec Carl. That's Studio EXECKARL @gmail.com. And this podcast runs on donations. So if you'd like to donate to the podcast, the link is in the show notes. Or you can go to www.letstalkabouthollywood.com/support. Super simple if you're so moved. And please come back. Please share. Please, know that I appreciate you. I know that we have a close community here, and we're at episode 31. I thank you for being here from the very beginning. I always say that. I'm so appreciative for you all. I know that we don't know each other personally, some of us, and those of you who are in other countries, we might not know each other, but I know that you listen, and thank you for making time. Thank you for making me a part of your moment whenever you listen to this, even if it's once every month. I'm just honored, and there's more to come, and you're always going to have safe passage with me. There's a lot more to come, definitely, because this is the very beginning of my quote-unquote official Hollywood career, and it's 24 years later, and there's still a lot to talk about things that we all can relate to in this business, and we're still working it, and we're still trying. And if you're not in Hollywood, just remember, be loving. Don't feel stuck, even though I know that it's hard. I do. I know that it's hard, and I know that we are in batshit crazy times. We're in scary times. But there's just, if there wasn't hope, then we wouldn't try. And we've got each other, and love is real. And on that note, don't forget, as I always say, and I mean it, love is real, and I wish you all great things. I'll see you next time. Thanks for being here. Bye-bye.